sometimes you just have to roll into it and just kind of start talking. So, again, as I laid out in the so I am recording in the chat. I said, hey, you don't have to use your real name. I'm going to put the audio up first, and if we feel like we want to put the video up on YouTube, that's fine. I typically just do audio because I have a face for radio. So it's one of those things that I've never really been keen on putting video up for a podcast, because for me, it's what am I showing, right? Just fucking three guys talking, right? Or just typically me just talking. And I always found that. I
apologize. My lawn guys are here, so you might get some background noise.
That's fine. I do realize that a lot of podcasts are really meant to be consumed by audio because you're either working, you're either exercising, you're walking and stuff like that. So nobody's standing there with a phone or a device in their face looking at video, right? Obviously, there are podcasts that are on video, but this one's going to be audio. And if you decide that you want to put it on video, we can. All right. And then also, you don't have to use your real name. You could say whatever you want in terms of names. And lastly, please do not use the company's name that you currently work for or have previously worked for. I just found that that's always a good rule of thumb when talking about this, only because historically
makes you easily identifiable.
Yeah. I mean, look, I'm not hiding it, right? I always say, hey, my name is Chuck, and I'm the host of the ITXP. And you could easily find me, right? Because this is registered under my corporation. Just good luck finding it, right? Right. And if you really, really want to troll me, you could. I'm not hiding anything. I'm just giving my opinion and laying things out. So having said that, I've already spoken too much. I really wanted to open the floor to you all and really talk about, again, introduce yourself. You don't have to use a real name. How long you've been in the industry, what got you into the industry, and we'll just take it from there. So the gentleman to my left with the virtual background, if you want to go first.
Sure. Call me Bob. I've been in the industry for 20 years this year. And I got started, I think, like most people, I got started in IT by playing games, right? And my interest in IT really derived from the fact that I didn't have the money for a very powerful machine. And I had to figure out how to optimize my own system to be able to play the games that I wanted to play, right? So I started off with a 386 DX40. And this is going to date me way back, right? Had 4 megs of memory and a 212 megabyte hard drive.
Nice. Yeah, we all remember those days.
212. And, you basically start off trying to get all these old DOS games to run, right? And one day my friend from high school said, hey, why don't you check out X-Wing? So that thing required a lot of conventional memory. Mm-hmm. So you figure out how to start moving things into extended and expanded memory, and that's where my sordid history with IT started. Right? I mean, I didn't even go to college really for IT. I majored in business.
Nice. And what was your major?
Business administration.
Oh, pretty cool.
But then I then steered that more into information technology. And that was very, very new at the time, right? It's not something that was offered everywhere. So came out with a concentration in IT and started my adventures there.
And that's funny because when I was in school, we didn't have a comp sci class. It was math with a concentration in computer science, right? Yeah. So I always say I started my academic career as a bio pre-med major, and about 2.5 years in, I switched to math with a concentration of in computer science. So yeah, it's interesting how folks get into this industry. So the gentleman with the New Jersey State Police hat, you can't hide yourself. Go ahead, introduce yourself.
Sure. My name's Mike, and since I'm the baby of this group, I'm about 1 year behind Bob. Got about 19 years experience this year, and pretty much the same way. I mean, we basically grew up in the same time, so started with the video games. We didn't have a computer in my house, so it was going over my friends' houses, checking out all the games over there. Ultimately, I ordered my first computer. First thing I did without booting it up was just rip the thing apart and see how it was put together, see if I could get it back together. Then it was trying to, illegally download games right off the bat. My friend's trying to transfer me his copy of Doom floppy disk over the modem. Wait like a whole day to transfer it and, make copies of that, see if we could play together online. Yeah. All that kind of snowballed. I just always had an interest in electronics, computers. Went to work at a company for a summer job, and they had a main engineer who just happened to be slightly better with computers than anybody else at that time, and started building out their network, and then went to Novell. And every summer and winter that I went back there, kind of showed me the new things that he'd done, how to make a PDC, how to make a BDC, how to do backups, file shares, all that. And just kind of in the back of my head, when I went to college, I kind of did the same thing. Information systems was new, right? So every time I tried to take classes for it, they would change the requirements. So every semester I wasn't making any progress. So I ended up having to drop that. I actually also have a degree in business, economics for business and financial markets. So based on that, I just went to work trying to sell some insurance and some 401ks, stocks, bonds, all that stuff. Nice. After like 2 or 3 months, I found out that I was mostly hanging out with the IT guy at that job and wondering why we were set up the way we were set up, and said, this probably isn't for me. And I had a friend who was fortunate enough to work at a company where they were hiring for junior systems admin. He took my resume as a favor and went into the interview. Guy didn't like me much, but it turned out I knew all the software that was on their server when he was giving me the tour of their network. And I said, "Oh, you have this semantic console configured wrong." And I said, "We had the same issue at the company I worked for." A couple clicks later, everything started lighting up green, good to go, and they hired me right after that. So that was pretty much how I got my start there.
It's interesting you guys bring that up, right? Because I got my first gig through a friend, right? I was actually working at a trucking company. I had dropped out of college at that point in time. Really didn't know what I wanted to do, but I knew it wasn't becoming a doctor. I just didn't have a passion for it. So a friend of mine from high school, we reconnected once I came back to Jersey after having, going to school in North Carolina. And, he said, "Hey, I know you're good with computers. Why don't you come work the help desk at this place that I'm at, because they're kind of short staffed." And that's kind of how my journey started, right? I started level 1 help desk, and this is 97. And they were using Lotus Domino, if you guys know what that is. So the Domino admin left because it was the late 90s, right? It was hot, right? Just like now, right? Everything's hot. If you had a required skill set or a specific skill set nobody else had, you were bouncing around from jobs to jobs to jobs. I was still learning. I didn't have any formal training. I like you, Mike, I pulled stuff apart when I had it. I didn't have a computer at home either. I was, like Bob, I was, my first computer was actually a Commodore VIC-20, right? You guys remember what that was? It was a poor man's Commodore 64. So it would play these cartridge games. But I learned BASIC at that point in time and just kind of started coding BASIC a little bit.
That was like the Atari copycat.
Yeah, it was like the Atari copycat. But coincidentally, Elon Musk also started his computer experience using a Commodore VIC-20, right? And look where the hell he is now.
Yep. And if we were friends with him instead of you.
Yeah, exactly. You'd be flying into outer space. But my point being, right, we all started, by getting our foot in the door, either through relationships that we had or somebody knew something and you knew more than the next person, right? And I kind of feel that's where we're at today, like coming full circle. If you really think about the landscape of IT, there was a time, I'm going to say, and you guys correct me if I'm wrong, but this is kind of my observation over the last 20 plus years, right? In where you had to be like either super certified or have a degree, right, to get your foot in the door, right? After the dot-com bubble in the late 90s, early 2000s, right? Everybody was like, whoa, these IT guys have no clue what they're doing, right? They're just spending money, right? And they're like, let's kind of put a pause on it. If you recall, if you really paid attention, a lot of IT organizations shifted under the financial organization, right? So the CFO can kind of grab hold of the control of the spending costs, right? And it was like, hey, these people need to be professional because you have a bunch of knuckleheads running the show, and look what it's doing to our business. You're just spending money. But over the past 10 years, I've seen that that's kind of shifted back into where we were in the 90s, because there's a lot of growth, there's a lot of change in technology. And I find that if you have this specific niche, I would say 5 years ago, it would be Kubernetes, right? And even now to some extent, right? Kubernetes. You can get your foot in the door. And then, even before that, maybe 7 years ago, if you had experience with AWS, and people were starting to kind of move their way into it, you can get a job even without having a degree. So that notion of having a degree to get a job is kind of out the door, right? It's more about who you know, and we all work for the same organization, and you can find, I always call it the circle of friends, who the circle of friends are, because you have people coming in and you're like, how the hell did they get this job? So I really think it's very much cyclical. Right.
Oh, it's the more things change, the more things stay the same, right?
Absolutely. And that's kind of one of the things I wanted to talk about today in terms of the landscape and the current landscape of IT and what your visions are in the future, right? So Bob, if you want to talk about what you currently do today and kind of how you've transitioned to that, you have a kind of interesting experience, I should say, or kind of path to where you are, because you used to work at a managed service provider, right? And kind of work in that world.
I've been all over the place. So, I cut my teeth in the capacity performance arena, right? I spent about a decade or more in that area. And, after a while, I just got a little tired of just doing the same old thing. There's not much that changes in the capacity performance area. The methodology stays the same. The statistics stay the same. The metrics pretty much stay the same, right?
For an IT guy, I should really have my act together. Damn internet went out. Because
what's your alias, bud?
Chuck. Oh, I'll edit that out. Don't worry. Just like.
Well, there's so many.
Yeah. So my internet went out. I have Comcast. I've been fighting with them for a long while, and you can hear my dogs fighting upstairs because I have 2 dogs. So sorry about that. Bob, go ahead, continue. You started the performance. I don't know if you want to continue there.
Yeah, I started, in the field of performance. I got recruited out of college, and it was, I guess I ended up in IT through what most people have a non-traditional way. I actually ended up going through a college recruitment program. They basically gave us a rotation and said, hey, what do you like to do? And the capacity and performance team basically recruited me because they didn't have, they're a bunch of old mainframers, right? They didn't have anybody else taking care of stuff. I thought it was interesting. I always had that history of optimizing my own systems, just trying to get every single cycle out of my computers. So I thought it was a really good fit. And that's where I got my start. But then after, more than a decade, nothing really changed. So I thought I'd better expand my horizons and get into some other areas. And the opportunity had come along to become a delivery lead for one of the managed service providers. They weren't that big, but they had a very challenging customer. And I knew a few of the guys whom I had previously worked with in a previous life.
Right.
So they reached out, and a couple of factors factored into that decision, but mostly it was I got along really well with the folks who were working there, and I think that would have made quality of life better overall.
Right.
And it was something new and it was something challenging.
Right.
So once I got involved in that account, I delved mostly into the workload automation space, right? In particular, things like Control-M and some AutoSys. And that started my path down my current career path, which is workload automation and automation in general, right? And that's the biggest buzzword of the industry these days is automate. But you can't just blindly automate, right? And you're going to find that out as you progress down that path in any vector. What I'm seeing these days is people just automating for the sake of automating. And what you eventually end up with is something like a Rube Goldberg device, right? Instead of the simplest components being put in, people put in things that they can do. And you just tend to add more and more failure points, whereas you should be streamlining the process and looking at it from a high level and saying, is this what I should be doing? Just because I can doesn't mean I should, right? Is this the best way of doing something? And I think that's where my background as a capacity and performance engineer comes in, right? Because now you're looking to streamline some of those cycles, right? Just because compute power is cheap, memory is cheap, storage is cheap, there's still a performance hit. You can't overcome physics, right? You can't say, hey, I'm going to put a data center in China and I'm working out of the US and I'm going to expect the same level of performance that I'm going to get if I put a data center in the next room, right? You just can't overcome that physical latency, no matter how good your technology is. So something to think about.
Yeah, and that's interesting that you bring that up because, the whole notion of automate, right? That's kind of been the mantra for a number of years, at least in my world, right? So coming from, the whatever you want to call it, right? Productivity space, connected business space, end user, whatever space, right? Workplace services, whatever you want to call it. I've been in that space for a while, where it's the foundations around email, mobile communications, instant messaging, audio, video, blah blah blah, right? And a lot of the time has been around, you got to automate this because it's very mundane and XYZ, right? So a lot of stuff early on before the cloud services came into the picture, right? We did try to do a lot of this stuff that's available now, right? Automatic failovers within Exchange, automatic account creations, automatic account terminations, things like that, have already been done or were already done. And then it came to, well, we have to have automated recovery systems, right? If a system fails, we have resiliency in our environment where we can automate things to that nature. And it's a little bit more complex when we talk about the spaces like Active Directory, right? Because if you have errors around Kerberos or LSAS, and let's say a service goes down or something goes down to kind of cause an interruption of service, sure, you can restart the service or restart the server, I should say, automatically based on a trigger. But then let's say the server goes down again, right?
And to add to that, right, I think you bring up a very good point. But what I'm seeing is sometimes there's just mindless automation, right? And people don't realize automation just makes things work faster and work at a more massive scale. But if your process is not what you want, is not well thought out, you're going to automate more mistakes. You're going to blow things up faster and on a grander scale.
And that was kind of my point to get to, right? Because I've come from a few organizations in where the management level really have not been very technical, right? It was only until I came to this organization where these have been the most, not the current leadership, but the previous leadership have been very, very technical, and they always challenged me to think about the process first before we actually automate, right? The previous head of infrastructure, we all know well, he would challenge me all the time. He's like, yes, automate, but make sure you do it right. Right, we don't want you to automate just to automate, and we would have discussions mostly around DNS and Active Directory, right? Because that's kind of my space. But it was that level of thinking to really ensure that we're doing what you just said. Process needs to be honed down first, and then we automate, right? Based on those processes. But most organizations that I've seen are flipping it around. It's like automate because I need Mike to do 10 other things, right? So why don't we automate what he does today so he can do these 10 other things, because we're going to run him, stretch him out to kind of the nth degree. And that's kind of where I see we are.
I definitely see that in my area of where we work. The whole goal is actually automation for the sake of automation almost. It's not about why we're doing it. It's literally take this out of the hands of everybody. We want to remove. I apologize. Hold on 1 minute.
No, don't worry. Look, we all have families, right?
Yeah.
you have your kids. I have my dogs upstairs, and my kids will be home soon anyway.
Well, and that's another aspect of IT, right? I think IT is one of the first industries where you blend your work and your life together. It's really hard to have that hard stop. Hey, I'm going to start working at 8. I'm going to stop working at 5. No, IT works at night. IT works 24/7 in most cases. And in fact, most of the changes today, or I would say most of the changes based on traditional ITSM and ITIL principles are done during off hours from the business as not to impact the business, right? But now we see a dramatic shift with DevOps in that now you stand up baby environments so that you can perform your changes during production hours and not impact the business, right? So there's a dramatic shift towards that, and maybe I'm hopeful that this will gain us back some sleeping hours.
That's still to be seen, right? Because I think let's back that up, because we're talking about IT in this umbrella, right? In the early years of this show, I always tried to break out what IT actually means. But if you're in the industry, most of the time, if you find yourself in software engineering, right, you're like, I'm not part of IT, right? That's Chuck, in the back end doing, making sure that I can log into my machine, or Mike doing software deployments or stuff like that, right? I'm not IT. I'm a software engineer. But the reality of it is, if you go home to your parents, right, they're going to want you to fix their computer because they know you deal with computers, and they may not have any knowledge of that, right? So in their mind, you're an IT person. I don't care, if you work for Facebook and you're building out the best UI, right? You're a front end designer or whatever you want to call yourself. To the outside world that doesn't live and breathe this, you're IT. Right? That's
something about computers. Fix mine.
Yeah, you're in IT, and that's how most of us got into this. But I also want to go back to Mike, because I want to give him an opportunity to kind of talk about where he's at, in terms of what he's been doing to get up to this point, right? How you kind of developed. Have you always been in this space? Like me, I've always been into the business productivity space with Lotus Domino, and then into Exchange and Active Directory.
Sure. And again, I apologize, guys. Like everybody said, we're in IT. My family's here with me. So, if I don't play with them during the day and do my changes at night, I don't want to miss out on that family time. So that's more important. Yeah. But when I got into this, I started as a sysadmin. So servers, DNS, DHCP, all that stuff, getting everybody on the domain, making sure everything was working. I always worked for smaller companies, and I want to put smaller in quotes. 300 or less, right? So they were sizable, but it wasn't like a 10-man shop where it was just one person. There was always, a team of, 5 IT people, let's say at least. And, I would be siloed into servers or patching or something like that, which always held my interest. I always liked doing the patching, doing the upgrades, working with the applications, working on compatibility. So I kind of ended up focusing on that. And I know we were previously talking about, how the market was cyclical. And when I first got in, it was right after the dot-com bust, right? So everybody was certification. And like we've mentioned, the way to get jobs is knowing somebody. We all kind of got our next job through knowing the person to open a door for us. And that's how I got in. And I actually got a lot of certifications for myself. I have 7 or 8 of them right now, just from a confidence building standpoint. I thought I knew what I was doing. And, I got into those first couple jobs and I said, let me go validate my skills. Let me take some classes. And as I would do it, I would realize I knew 90% of the material as I was hearing it or reading it. And it really, every certification I took boosted my confidence for the next one. And I just kept rolling. I don't know how many people here have their MCSE, but if you remember the 7210, I think it was called the Beast. And it was just the one course during the MCSE that absolutely ruined people. You would end up taking it 2 or 3 times. I passed that on my first shot and I was so thrilled. And that was the biggest confidence booster for me, and I went in, I took all those security exams. I got Security Plus back in beta and all that stuff. And I focused just on the security track for myself. So I've always kind of followed the trend of the industry and I've looked for a niche to keep myself in there. So, when people were moving to SMS and then it became SCCM and now it's, MEM, CM. So I focus on whatever's coming out in that area, the newest thing. And if you could get your foot in there, it seems to open more opportunities for you. And while the certifications aren't specifically necessary, what they do is they kind of help you get your foot in the door. It's like having a friend in there, right? You see all the pretty logos on the resume. It doesn't impress anybody who works in the department, right? They're going to ask you real questions. They're going to ask you technical knowledge. But all the gatekeeping is like, hey, this guy hits these boxes. Look at these things. He's got to know something. And, I feel there are some values in doing that. Not necessarily the college degree, like you said. You don't need it anymore. A year, 2 years of hands-on, actually developing skills, that's all you need to do this. So I would say definitely focus on anything coming out new that you have an interest in, modern management, security, whatever, some kind of programming language, the newest automation. That's the way to go. You take that, you reduce yourself from that market, right? If you wanted to go do AWS right now, you're up against a million people who have an AWS cert, right? You go learn whatever the latest thing that's coming out for that is, or Google or Azure or a competing product, then that's your market. You're up against such a limited amount of competition. Then you could say, look, let me show you what I can do. I have experience. Not many people have this hands-on. This technology is only a year or 2 old. That's where you really get in the door. And then you kind of drive it from there. You take your pivot, you look for your lateral shifts. Like, all right, I'm in here, I'm established. What else holds my interest? What other teams can I start talking to? Interacting with you guys, is so helpful. You either come up with, here's the new stuff I've been learning on my own, or look what we're doing. And it kind of triggers like, how can I hook into that? How can I integrate that into what I do? Can I utilize that? Can I make my thing better by whatever you're doing? So that's how I got in and where I try to focus and move myself now. So
that's kind of a good segue into what I want to talk about next is how do you keep your skills fresh, right? I know you talked about trying to keep ahead of the game or trying to be in some sort of niche market, right? Right now, AWS is still a hot commodity. Azure is coming up, most notably now that the government is kind of finalized that deal with Microsoft and putting their stuff on Azure, or I guess most of the DoD stuff on Azure. I'm sure there's going to be pockets of the government that's going to be on AWS as well, but the kind of bulk packages are going to, or bulk use cases are going to be on Azure. But I was actually looking into Google Cloud Platform, right, and their certification, because coincidentally, if you have that certification, it's the highest paid certification to date, even ahead of CISSP. And the way I was reading it, and I could be reading it completely wrong, is that it's more geared around not just Google Cloud Platform, but just the cloud platform in general, right? So it could be Google, it could be Azure, it could be AWS, it could be any other Rackspace, a bunch of different other providers out there, but it really gives you that core concentration in managing services in the cloud. So I know Bob and I worked on the Deep Racer League on AWS. We found it very, very interesting. We learned a couple of things here and there. We talked to you, Mike, on seeing what we could do past that, right? But I got to tell you, that was tough to keep my mind focused on, right? I know, Bob and I, we kind of went down a path and said, all right, we're going to divert. You're going to do your own models. I'll do my own models. And then we'll come back together and kind of see what we can get for best of both worlds. I think as a first time, up against a bunch of software engineers within our organization, we did pretty good, right? So how do you guys stay fresh in terms of skills? How do you find that time to kind of hone your skills or find time to learn new skills?
Bob, you want to take it
Mike,
first?
You want to go first?
All right. So, I mean, time is the one commodity I don't have, right? I try to carve out blocks on my calendar every day. Doesn't happen. There's always escalations coming in, right? So basically, till my whole family's asleep.
Both from work and home.
Yeah, until my family's asleep and I'm compromising my sleep to spend an extra hour or two looking into something. A lot of what I get good at, whether it's looking for something to help me solve my problem at work or technology I was exposed to at work, that's kind of where I do it. So let's just take automation, for example. I switched departments a couple of years ago here, and there was a big focus on automation. So I had to go back, and I did scripting 15 years ago, and now it turned into go back, reteach yourself object-oriented programming languages. Look at PowerShell, look at Python. I know Bob's doing things related to Ansible and other automation platforms and making sure all the systems just kind of configure themselves as needed. All that stuff's super important. The best way I found is honestly just sacrificing my sleep because my family's too young. I don't have the time to be like, they're busy with activities, so I have a chunk of time right now. Unfortunately, it's either learn it early before you have the family or you improve yourself later on after you're more established. But it's tough when you're in the midst of raising a young family. So
I think, you said it right. It's you just never stop learning though, right? You can't stop ever learning. But this goes back, for the people who are not yet in the IT industry, who want to break into the IT industry, you have to have a solid grasp of the fundamentals. I can't emphasize that enough regarding any profession or any field that you're interested in, right? A lot of the things that we're picking up on, GCP, AWS, Ansible, Jenkins, all these buzzwords, they're built on a fundamental understanding of networking technology, fundamental understanding of how computers talk to each other, right? DNS and things like that. And what I'm seeing in our industry is a lot of people come in, they're like well-versed in AWS, they're well-versed in Azure, PowerShell, whatever, but they're not well-versed in how fundamental technology works, right? The underlying technology. And when something breaks, the troubleshooting is off the wall, right? Like people think they start with the most complicated issue first. And 9 times out of 10, it's not that, right? It's something really basic. Like you should always check like the underlying infrastructure. Is your network communicating? Is there a problem with the cable? Is something, right? Because you go through all these other troubleshooting steps if you're at a higher layer of the stack. And it turns out that it's something lower. It's like a network protocol that's misconfigured. It's you have a network outage happening. You go through all that work trying to dig down to, in reverse. You spend too much time. If you go from the bottom up and just tick off all the boxes and make sure everything's working as it should be until you get to the layer that's broken, then you have a better shot of quickly fixing that issue, right? I mean, Chuck, you probably see this all the time. Mike.
Yeah, no, you made a really good point. That's super valuable and definitely something that we've seen over the years is, you hire somebody and they're good at one specific thing, but they don't have the background of how the thing works, why it works that way, and their troubleshooting is only focused on the one thing that they know, right? Everything's a nail because the only tool they have is a hammer. So
that's right.
It's always DNS, by the way. If you're wondering what the problem is, it's always DNS.
It is always
something's not plugged in, or it's DNS. That's it.
We have a former colleague who's now, or storage. We have a former colleague who's now at Palo Alto who would always yell at me because it was always a DNS issue and never a network issue or firewall issue. So he would always say it's a DNS issue. But you know what? It's interesting that you mentioned that, the fundamentals, because I too have seen that. And I think this is one of the reasons why network engineering has a resurgence, right? Because I've seen that in the mid 90s to post.com bubble. Network engineering is where you want it to be, right? You wanted to get that CCIE, you wanted to excel to that level because you're going to sit pretty in either working for Cisco or some of the larger organizations working as network engineer, and then these other the other job titles came up and people forgot about networking. But I'm actually seeing the resurgence of that. The combination of networking skills and Python, you can get a really sweet gig. For another former colleague of ours who used to work on the networking side of the house in New York with us, he left to go to Bloomberg, and now he's at SpaceX, right, working in network ops. So he's really and he's a young guy, right? I think he's like 26 maybe, but he's taking advantage of kind of that resurgence in we really need skilled network engineers who also know Python to do a lot of the automation, to do the intelligence behind networking, to do the connections from on-premise to cloud, whatever that may be, whatever they're doing in SpaceX with the launches of their satellites, right? So networking has really resurged as, oh shit, we really need to figure this out because it's going to make our lives easier. So that's good, understanding the fundamentals. And I want to throw in there, understanding how to actually troubleshoot. You hit that nail on the head, Bob, and where the lack of understanding on how to troubleshoot really is one of the reasons why outages extend so long as they do, right? Most of the time, people are trying to do from the top down instead of going from the bottom up. And a lot of times, we have people flat out saying, no, it's not them, when we don't have visibility. I'm talking about the security people. We don't have visibility into their stack, right? But we know that we've done our due diligence and say, hey, this is nothing that we can see on our end. And here's the evidence by doing memory dumps and things like that, going really at the kernel level. There's something that your application is doing, and you need to tell us what it's doing. And they say, no, it's not us. Because from my perspective and from my experience, people don't want to look stupid, right? And I think if we move away from that notion of I always have to be right, I think it'll make for a better troubleshooting experience, especially when we have outages. Right? Outages are kind of the big thing where people all get into a room. And I did a couple of episodes on this, especially with our large outage last year, just kind of giving my observations and insights into various outages that I've been in. Right? I've talked about my big 19-hour straight troubleshooting with Microsoft on an Exchange issue back in 2006, 2007, right? And just where you're working with a vendor and they're handing off people, right, because their shifts are over, but you're still on that call because you're the only guy that's able to do it, right? But you're going through each of the troubleshooting methodologies and understanding how that stack works. I think that's really important. I think that's really key. But how do people learn how to troubleshoot? Right? Nobody teaches you that. You either kind of figure it out on your own, or you kind of go through the motions on these outages. So, what are your thoughts on that? Like, how do people learn how to troubleshoot?
I mean, I personally think that was the reason that smaller companies were better for me in the beginning. When you come into a large company, you're generally siloed, right? You work in that one specific area. If you need to interact with a different service or whatever, it's a whole nother team that only handles that focus. So you really don't have a lot of guys who have that experience of how everything came together. And it's the same with the people who only focus on certifications or boot camp them and just do the practice exams, right? You don't understand why it works. A good way to learn it is honestly, you work for a small company where you're one of a handful of guys and you find out why everything works because you have to support everything. When you're a jack of all trades, you kind of get better at doing that. When you build the relationships in the bigger companies with guys on different teams and you start talking on the side like we do, then I learned more about your areas and I learned more about Bob's areas and how they interact. And that can key me off into, hey, maybe this is why that thing's a problem. We just had a real large incident with one of our security tools. And, I had to administer one of the security tools in the past at one of my smaller companies. So I had an idea of how everything worked. And that's what keyed me in to figure out the issue during a Windows 10 upgrade between an older version and a more modern version now, where they had settings that they had enabled. And once we started upgrading, we saw things not working. We didn't know why. We didn't know if versions were incompatible, what the issue was. And when we started deep diving, we found out they'd enabled settings and nothing ever broke. And they assumed, hey, everything's great. They didn't test it. Well, it turns out the functionality didn't exist in the OS that we're using on our desktops. So they weren't hooking into anything. They weren't actually monitoring anything. When we upgraded, now all of a sudden that feature became active and became a problem. And, just randomly chatting, hey, I just figured this problem out. I took care of resolving it for these applications. All of a sudden, Bob's pinging me, hey, we're seeing the same behavior on our applications. Is it related? Now it's, getting escalated. But that level of troubleshooting comes from having your hands on, getting dirty. And it's the caveat and downside of working for a larger company off the bat. That being said, I mean, it's far easier to move up in a larger company. There's more room for growth. There's a lot of exposure to new technologies and different people. And it's really about, building those relationships to have everybody kind of spend time with you and tell you what they're working on, how it works, explain it to you. That's, don't be afraid to mess it up. Just don't test it in prod, right?
Right. And to your point earlier, Chuck, is some people are embarrassed to speak up, right? Because they don't want to show their lack of knowledge, or they don't want to say something that can be misconstrued as, oh, that's a dumb thing. But going back to school, right? There was no dumb question. The same thing goes at the workplace. I think you just need to be open about things. You need to just say, just ask a question. Don't assume anything. If you can leave your ego at the door, just check your ego at the door. And that goes a long way to instilling that cooperative atmosphere, right? And, and pattern recognition. And one thing is actually reading and understanding the error messages that come up, right? Because I find a lot of times it's right there. And when L1 calls you and says, hey, this is what it says. Well, if they had simply just read the error message, they would have understood what broke. But because, their whole training is, oh, it broke, something broke, and I'm going to go contact somebody above me, that you're never going to learn anything that way, because you're not taking the time to understand or try to understand what happened, right? If you always rely on somebody who knows more, it becomes a crutch until you take that initiative and you say, hey, I'm going to try to troubleshoot this first. And if I can't, then I reach out to a resource who's more knowledgeable. All right, just at least get that initial understanding. What's happening? What does that error message mean? A quick Google search can, in many cases, turn up some very helpful results. And this goes back to the experience, right? So Mike is absolutely correct. Smaller companies, you get to experience things a lot more. You have to be the jack of all trades. You have to wear multiple hats. But at larger companies, you're sometimes siloed and you don't get that insight. So you have to rely on other people's insights, right? You have to talk to your colleagues more. You have to open up lines of communication, and you have to go out and see if anybody else at another organization has experienced the same things that you have.
Yeah, and I think we're gonna wrap it up here because I know we have a couple minutes left, and I just want to make sure that we finish off on that one topic. And you really hit the nail on the head, Bob, in terms of communication, right? Building those relationships not only within your immediate department or line of business, let's say, but branching out as well. Finding out who the right people are within the organizations to really understand certain things. Mike, you mentioned, that's why you talk to Bob and I, right? Is because you really, it helps you understand better what we all do, because that we play a role in what you do. And even outside of that, right? Just kind of expanding your circle of friends, I want to call it, or even network of relationships within an organization is one thing, but also branching out into, well, once we're post-COVID, I should say, branching out your exposure to various other groups, right? Like meetups and stuff like that. I know stuff still goes on online virtually, but there's still a lot to be said for face-to-face, right? Or just hanging out at a bar or drinking some beers or whatever, right? I remember those were the most poignant moments for me throughout my career, and where I would go to lunch with a couple of people within the organization. I would learn so much more, so much so that at the point of my longest stint at a publishing company, we essentially called ourselves the Brain Trust, because we built up relationships over the course of time. I was there 10 years. We built up a relationship over the course of time that we would have lunch or even drinks after work, and where we would make decisions for the organization because we knew where the direction had to go to kind of achieve an end goal. So I think relationship building should be a key skill that folks should have coming into an organization. If you don't have it,
soft skills super important, man. You're 100% dead on there. I mean, that's one of the lessons I learned in the bigger company, right? Because in a smaller company, you don't have that. It's just you're generally talking to your boss. This is what we need to do. Go. You have that level of trust. Here, there's so many other people, and like you said, those social gatherings outside, whether it's lunch, whether it's drinks, make a significant difference. You get so much more exposure to senior level managers or people who've been here with that experience, and you don't impress them so much on the job solving a problem so much as you do when you're casually talking to them and you realize you have something in common, you have something to bond over. Then you start talking and you build that relationship, and that's how it goes to, hey, let's loop this guy in. Maybe he can help us. Oh, I know so-and-so has experience with this or an interest in this. Let's see if they want to be a part of this project or has some input. That stuff was invaluable. And I learned that lesson slower than I probably should have. You guys were very good about trying to drag me kicking and screaming into it, and I appreciate it. So yeah, definitely, absolutely important. Soft skills, almost more so than technical skills.
Good point.
Couldn't agree more.
Awesome. Well, thanks, guys. I think we should do this again. I know this is, it was cut short because of my internet issues. Sorry for that. But let's do this again. And